Hello everyone, welcome to the last installment of the Out Chasing Stars Marine Electrical 101 series. We've been on quite a journey, starting from literally the basics to today, we're going to talk about the issues cruisers face trying to plug into shore power when sailing to different countries. So again, welcome. I'm David, and I'd like to invite you to sit back, relax, and let's talk boats. Let's start off by setting down some base assumptions. First, I'm assuming your boat will have a mix of DC 12 or 24 volt and AC 120 240 volt 60 Hertz or 230 volt 50 Hertz systems. This should cover just about every cruising boat out on the water these days. Second, we're going to assume you're wanting to cruise internationally in countries with a different AC system than your boat. If you plan on just sailing around your home country or are staying in a region with the same AC systems, such as most of the Med, then there's not going to be much of a problem. And third, I'm operating under the assumption that you'll be staying in a marina for some reason or another during these international travels. When we looked back on our entire time sailing around the world, we spent about 19% of our nights at a dock. And in those instances, you want to plug into shore power. Now let's talk about the basic problem. Changing the frequency is complicated and requires expensive equipment. So you're faced with the challenge of trying to provide power to your AC systems while you're in a country that uses the opposite frequency. Some equipment, like modern laptops, don't care. They can run on either 50 or 60 Hertz. But some of those AC systems on your boat are frequency sensitive. Things like air cons or microwaves are a few of the big ticket items people worry about. Now, frequency sensitive can mean anything from will not run on the wrong frequency to it will run but at different speeds than intended. For example, the compressor of a 50 Hertz rated aircon will run faster when it's on 60 Hertz, and as you'd expect, a 60 Hertz rated aircon will run slower on 50 Hertz. Running something faster than intended would be a good way to shorten the life, so the general consensus is it's better to run 60 Hertz equipment at 50 Hertz, but that requires that it can run on the different frequency. Before we get too deep into the options available for solving this problem, I do want to touch briefly on the physical shore power connections that you'll be plugging into. These shoreside connections vary quite a lot around the world. Now, occasionally, a marina would have a local plug we could rent, or else we had to find and buy one. But this also required us to rewire a shore power cord to accommodate the local plug, and we kept a spare cord just for that purpose. The technicalities of how to do that is not what this video is about. AC electricity, it can be dangerous, so if you don't understand how to do the rewiring, you're going to need to work with an electrician. One other thing that I want to mention is that when you're considering your shore power setup, you need to have some form of galvanic isolation. This is relevant even if you never plan on leaving your home arena. Whenever you're plugged into shore power, you need to worry about low voltage DC currents coming on board your boat via the shore power ground wire. These stray currents, they can cause a lot of problems, including leading to corrosion in the through holes, propellers, shafts, sail drives, or any other underwater metals. There are a few ways to achieve galvanic isolation in your shore power setup, and I'll try to highlight which setup options include it, but for reference, the most basic is just to install what's called, surprise, surprise, a galvanic isolator. You won't need multiple ways, but you at least need one. I've talked to a lot of cruisers about how they've addressed the shore power problem, and I did a lot of research when we were first outfitting Starry Horizons 8 years ago. So let's do a run through of the various options and talk about some of the pros and cons of each. The first option is simply to not plug in whenever you're in a marina. That means in order to use your AC systems for any length of time, you'll likely need to run a generator. Those are loud, which means you'll quickly become the most popular boat on the dock, and running the genset means more wear and tear, more maintenance, and you'll be using up your limited diesel supply. On the plus side, not plugging in means you won't be paying extra fees if the marina charges extra for supplying power. But the reality is, the times when we're in a marina, those are the ones we want to be able to run our AC systems, specifically our air conditioning. Being at a dock means you likely aren't facing into the prevailing winds, so opening hatches doesn't provide great ventilation. But we've also deliberately chosen to go into a marina to get AC power to run our air conditioning because it's just too insanely hot otherwise sometimes. So, not plugging in was an option we quickly ruled out right from the start. Your second option, and this is one that I was a bit surprised to hear how many people had done, is to wire in a duplicate AC system for the opposite AC power. So if you're an American boat with 120 to 40 volt 60 hertz power, you would wire in a separate 230 volt 50 hertz system. To me, this is a pretty serious undertaking, and it would still require a few compromises. You would need to source duplicate equipment that would run only on the separate system. Fontaine-Pajot designed the Helia with 6 air conditioning units. It would be insanely costly, and we don't want to dedicate the space to have 6 additional air cons that are only designed to run on 50 hertz. So maybe you choose to get 1 or 2 duplicate air cons, but you'd be limiting to cooling or heating only where the locations they're installed in the boat. And wiring in a separate system would also involve things like additional electrical plugs, which means you're probably duplicating your favorite coffee pot or tea kettle, but at least if it breaks, you'll be able to find another one locally rather than waiting for a friend to fly in or hassle with international shipping. One thing I do want to mention about going with this option is that generally your battery charging equipment, it doesn't care what voltage or frequency the shore power is. So you shouldn't need duplicate battery chargers, but depending on your equipment, you may have to be doing a bit of reprogramming of settings when you swap between AC power systems. The third option available to you, and I'd say this is probably the most common one, is to add an isolation transformer as part of your shore power setup. These are designed to take the power coming from shore and either step up or step down the voltage to match the AC power on your boat. And it has the benefit of providing galvanic isolation as well. The big drawback of this setup is that isolation transformers do not change the frequency, only the voltage. So if you have AC powered equipment that you want to use that simply won't work on the wrong frequency, you'll need to do a little extra thinking. If you have a battery charger that's separate from your inverter, and that inverter is sized to handle your AC loads, you can just run the load off the inverter. If you have a combination battery charger inverter, like our Victron MultiPlus, they typically only do one function at a time. So while plugged into shore power, they would be in battery charger mode, and you need to do something like get an extra inverter. The extra inverter will take power from your batteries and happily supply the correct voltage and frequency for those sensitive AC loads. It's not too complicated, so the remaining challenge is what to do about air conditioning. The ideal solution is to find air cons that can work at both 50 and 60 hertz, but ones that are designed for both are somewhat rare. Your other choice is to run the air cons on your boat at the improper frequency. As I said earlier, running 60 hertz air cons at 50 hertz is generally considered better than running 50 hertz at 60. For reference, the 60 hertz Dometic air cons on Starry Horizons have labels that say derated at 50 hertz, so it could be worth a conversation with the manufacturer. Now that we've covered 2 of the more common solutions, let's talk about what we did on Starry Horizons. We went all in and invested in a shore power frequency converter. Like an isolation transformer, this system converts voltage, but unlike an isolation transformer, it also converts frequency. That means anywhere in the world that we plugged into a marina, we had nice, clean, US-style power on the boat. And it provides galvanic isolation. For those of you who are curious, the way these systems work to also convert frequency is by taking the incoming AC power, converting it to DC power, and then inverting it to the desired voltage and frequency. Sounds awesome, right? Well, it is, but it's not without its drawbacks. I wasn't kidding when I said we invested in it. These are incredibly expensive. They're also extremely heavy and very large. The only place we could find to install it was under the owner's berth, but it required cutting open the compartment to enlarge it pretty significantly. Also, it generates a lot of heat. We have vented the compartment with fans, but when it's running, we still need to keep an aircon on to help prevent overheating. That also means it's not a great solution for when we're on the hard. These systems, they're typically installed on much larger yachts, and I honestly can't think of another cruiser of our size who's had one. So the question I always get asked is, would I do it again? And that answer is no. We just didn't stay in marinas enough to justify the expense, the weight, and the loss of storage space. Air conditioning was my primary concern, but with the Fontaine Pajot factory-installed Dometic units capable of running at 50 Hz, I would have gone the isolation transformer route if we'd kept the same factory options. But what if I was starting over from scratch? Well, that's a very different question, and it brings us to another shore power solution that I think is rapidly growing in popularity. With the continuing increases in technology, I've met a lot more boats that have moved away from the concept of powering equipment from shore power and instead use shore power to charge their batteries using big battery chargers and then use big inverters to power their AC equipment. This is roughly the same concept as our frequency converter. As I mentioned, battery chargers won't care what AC voltage or frequency they get. They convert that into nice 12 or 24 volt DC power. The inverter would be set up with whatever electrical system you have on your boat, so your AC equipment is always getting the proper voltage and frequency. You would need a dedicated galvanic isolator and would also need to do some work to properly size the battery charger and inverter for the systems you intend to run. Once again, aircon is the big issue. You would definitely want soft starts to minimize the power draw when the units start up, but our 12K BTU Dometic units still consume a bit over 1 kilowatt when cooling. That's a lot of power. Even with a large inverter, we'd probably still need to pick and choose which of our aircons we could run at any given time. But we could still choose, and that would allow us to run aircon, say, in the salon during the day, and then swap to the units in our cabin at night. That's a trade-off I'd be willing to make given the overall simplicity of the system. So there we go. That's a pretty decent overview of the options for solving the shore power problem when sailing internationally. Hopefully, this gives you a good place to start from. And if you've already solved this problem on your boat, well, leave a comment down below. Let me know how you did it. More knowledge is always helpful for our fellow sailors. This will also wrap up the videos I had planned for our Marine Electrical 101 series. I really hope y'all have gotten some use out of it and feel a bit better prepared for the cruising life. I greatly appreciate you following along, and if you haven't done so already, well, you can click up here to subscribe so you don't miss out as we work on more videos covering all the things we learned while sailing around the world. And if you'd like to check out some of our previous adventures, you can click down here. Thanks again for watching. We'll see y'all another day, another bay.